Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was already high and punishing when Pierce Bradley's body gave out in the dust behind the trading post. She had not eaten in 2 days. Her chest burned when she breathed, and her legs had stopped listening to her hours ago, but she had kept walking anyway. Until now. The people behind the counter watched her fall. One of the women whispered something. A man in a stained vest shook his head. "Too sick to work," he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. "Tried her last week. Could not keep up. Ain't running a charity." They turned their backs to her then. Just like the last place. And the place before that. Pierce lay on her side in the red dirt, eyes open, mouth dry. She had crossed 2 towns this week alone, trying to find someone who would give her a chance. But her lungs were weak, and her strength had never returned after the fever. She was only 23, but most days she felt twice that. A shadow fell over her. Not the sun shifting, something closer, taller. "You alive?" a man's voice asked. She blinked. His boots were dusty but clean. His trousers were worn, but not torn. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see a strong jaw, a narrow scar just under his cheekbone. "Will be," she whispered. He crouched down, his voice low. "Can you sit up?" No, he did not ask anything else. He just slid an arm under her back and lifted her like she weighed nothing. She flinched, but he did not let her go. "What are you doing?" she rasped. "Getting you out of the dirt." He walked her past the trading post, toward a tall paint horse tied to a post. She had not seen it when she stumbled in. He moved like someone used to being followed, but he did not look back to check. He stopped beside the horse and adjusted the saddle. "You trust me?" he asked. No, his eyes crinkled a little, like her answer did not bother him. "That's fair," he said. "But I'm putting you on this horse anyway." She did not have the strength to argue. He lifted her up again, steadier this time, and placed her carefully in the saddle. Her fingers barely managed to grip the horn. He mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest with one arm, the reins in his other hand. "Where are you taking me?" "North," he said. "Got a place an hour out. You look like you need rest more than anything." She wanted to argue, but her body sagged into him. The steady warmth of his chest, the smell of leather and sun, and the sure rhythm of the horse, all of it started to blur together. "What's your name?" she asked. "Malcolm Kane," he said. "And you?" "Pierce Bradley." He did not say anything for a while. Then his voice came again, quieter. "Well, Miss Bradley, you are on my horse now. That makes you mine to look after." She did not believe him. Not really. But his words stayed in her mind the whole ride. Malcolm's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by junipers and low hills. It was not big, but it was clean and solid built. A corral sat nearby, and a small barn leaned against the slope. He carried her inside and set her down gently on a cot near the hearth. The place smelled of pine, ash, and something cooking. "You have food?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded once. "Stew's on. You eat first. Talk later." She tried to sit up, but the motion made her cough. Malcolm propped her up with a wool blanket, then brought over a bowl. He fed her in slow, steady spoonfuls. She hated how weak she felt, but he did not comment, just made sure she got enough. When she was done, she leaned back and let her eyes close. "You live alone?" she asked.
"Yeah."
"No wife? No family?" "No wife," he said. "Family's all buried by now." She opened her eyes again. "Why did you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because someone should have. And no one else did." She turned her face away and stared at the fire. He did not press her with more questions. That night, she slept longer than she had in weeks. The next day, he showed her the porch. The breeze was cool under the eaves, and she sat wrapped in a blanket while he split wood a few yards away. She watched the way his shoulders moved, how he paused sometimes to check on her without making it obvious. He worked quiet, steady. You always pick up strangers from the dirt? She asked. He paused, axe over his shoulder. No, he said. Just you. A strange heat bloomed in her chest. Not fever. Something else. You do not even know me. I know enough, he said. You are hurting. But you did not stop walking. That tells me something. She looked down at her hands. Thin, pale. Not much to offer. I cannot even work, she said. No one wants someone like me. I do, he said, without hesitation. She looked up sharply. I did not mean. I meant what I said, Malcolm cut in. You are on my horse, and you are mine to look after now. You do not even know if I will get better. I can wait. She swallowed hard. You do not need to fix me. I am not trying to fix anything, he said. I am staying. That is all. She turned her face away so he could not see the tears starting in her eyes. Days passed. She got stronger. Not all at once. But she could stand again. Walk to the porch without help. Stir the stew pot. Malcolm never hurried her. Never asked for anything. But he made space for her in small ways, an extra blanket folded at the foot of her cot, a carved wooden cup set aside just for her, a place beside him at the table. One evening, she sat beside him on the porch. He handed her a cup of warm cider. You are not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? Someone who would leave me, same as the rest. He looked at her then, really looked. I am not going anywhere, Pierce. She stared at him, her heart thudding. Why me? She whispered. Because the first time I saw you, you were half dead in the dirt. And all I could think was, if I let you go, I would never forgive myself. She set the cup down, her hands shaking. Malcolm, he reached out slowly, letting her see every motion. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, warm. You do not have to be strong for me, he said. You are already enough. She leaned into his touch. And for the first time in years, she believed someone meant it. The wind shifted late in the day, carrying the scent of creosote and dry sage across the clearing. Pierce stood near the fence line, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching a pair of quail dart through the brush. The sun was lowering behind the hills, casting long orange shadows that stretched like fingers across the earth. Malcolm was at the forge, driving a glowing horseshoe into shape with careful strikes. She could hear the rhythm of his hammer, steady and sure. The sound didn't grate, it calmed something in her. She had known what a quiet life could feel like until she'd stepped into this one. He quenched the iron in a trough, steam hissing into the air. When he looked up, their eyes met across the yard. He didn't wave or call out. He just watched her for a moment, then went back to work. She liked that about him. His silence didn't push her away. It waited. That night, as she stirred flour into a pan to thicken the gravy, he leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You were watching the birds, he said. They move quick, she replied. But they never seem afraid. He stepped inside, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. You ever handle a rifle? He asked. She shook her head. Never had reason. I could show you if you're willing. She glanced up at him. You think I'll need to? You're living out here now. Sickness ain't the only danger. You don't have to be strong all the time, but I'd like you to be safe when I'm not nearby. She nodded slowly. All right. He gave a short nod back, then sat at the table, waiting for supper. After they ate, she cleared the plates while he lit the lantern. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it had become familiar, a kind of shared space where nothing needed to be forced. She wiped her hands on a cloth and turned. Malcolm. He looked up, resting his arms on the table. I ain't asked you yet, how long have you lived on this land? He leaned back in his chair, considering. 12 years now. Bought it after the war ended. Built the cabin myself, piece by piece. Did you come out here alone? No, he said, voice quiet. There was someone. My brother, Nathan. He was younger. We came from Missouri. He didn't stay long. Her brow furrowed. He leave?
Died, Malcolm said.
Snakebite. 3 months after we got here. She looked down, fingers tightening around the cloth.
I'm sorry.
I learned to stop expecting folks to stay after that, he said. Didn't mean I stopped wanting them to. She stepped toward him slowly, not touching, just standing at the edge of his reach. It's all right to want it. His voice dropped. It feels like you're still deciding whether to stay. I am, she said honestly. Not because I don't want to, just. I've never been any use to anyone. Not for long. You've changed more in 2 weeks than some do in a year, he said. That's not nothing. She met his eyes. You don't look at me the way other men did, back in town. I'm not them.
No, she said.
You're not. He stood, slow and careful, and stepped toward her. They were close now, the lantern light painting his features in soft gold. I don't expect anything from you, he said. But if you stay, I'll make room for you in every part of this life. Not out of pity. Not because I feel sorry. Because I want you here. Her breath caught. There was no pressure in his words, only promise. I'm not ready to give my whole heart, she said. He nodded once. Then give me what you can. I'll wait for the rest. She didn't speak again, just reached for his hand and laced her fingers with his. His grip was warm, solid, the kind you could lean on. That night, she moved her bedding from the cot to the opposite side of the room, nearer the hearth, nearer him. He said nothing when he saw it in the morning, just poured her coffee and slid the cup across the table. Later, as they walked the edge of the property, he handed her a rifle. She took it with both hands, heavier than she expected. He guided her through the stance, the aim, the trigger. Her first shot missed by a wide mark. She laughed, surprised at the sound. You'll get it, he said.
And she did.
By the time the sun dropped below the ridge, she had hit a knot in a fence post clean through. Walking back to the cabin, she looked over at him. His shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows, and dust clung to the hem of his trousers. He didn't smile, but his eyes were steady, content. Malcolm. Yeah. You're not going to change your mind about me, are you? No, he said. I made it up the moment I saw you wouldn't quit, even when it hurt. She looked ahead, toward the warm glow waiting in the windows. Then I reckon I'll stay. The first rain came in the night, slow and steady above the cedar shakes. Pierce woke to the sound of it, her face turned toward the window. The wind had cooled, carrying the smell of wet earth through the chinks in the logs. She lay still, listening to how the roof held firm under the weight of the water. Malcolm was already up. She could hear him moving about in the other room, the scrape of a chair leg, the low creak of a cupboard door. She pulled on her boots and wrapped her shawl around her, the wool holding a faint scent of wood smoke. When she stepped into the main room, he looked up from the hearth, where he was oiling the inside of a rifle barrel. You sleep? He asked. Some. He gestured to the table. I made coffee, but it's strong enough to peel paint. She sat down and took a sip anyway. The bitterness held a strange comfort. He returned the rifle to its place above the mantel and sat across from her. There's a man rides through twice a season, he said. Name's Ben Larkin. Brings seed and salt. Word from the post office. He's due in a few days. She waited, watching him. I thought I'd send a letter. She didn't answer right away. The rain tapped soft against the windows. Who would you write to? She asked.
No one.
I was thinking you might want to. She looked down into the coffee, her hand tightening around the cup. I haven't got anyone left who'd care, she said. He didn't give her pity, just nodded once. Still, he said, if ever you change your mind, I'll leave paper out. Later that morning, they moved the chickens to the barn, the coop slick with mud. Malcolm worked in silence, sleeves rolled, his hands quick and sure. Pierce kept pace, unhooking latches and scattering straw, her grip steadier than it had been. When they finished, She leaned against the barn wall to catch her breath. He handed her a strip of jerky from his coat pocket. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He chewed a moment before answering.
No.
"I've already seen what's out there." She looked out across the wet field, the sky pale and low. "I dreamed about Kansas once. When I was younger, thought I'd marry someone with a little farm, maybe 2 cows, a fence that didn't lean." He folded his arms. "You could still have that. You think I'd leave this place now?" He met her gaze. "I don't know what you want yet. I want to feel useful again." He nodded slowly. "You do." She didn't reply, but her lips pressed together, as if holding in something that would have broken her voice. They walked back to the cabin without speaking. That night, she took the paper he'd left and sat by the fire. She didn't write a letter, just folded it into quarters and held it in her palm. The next morning, she rose early and swept the floor, pausing often to catch her breath. When Malcolm came in from the barn, he paused at the door. "You don't have to do all that." "I know," she said, "but I like the sound of the broom." He stepped inside and set a canvas sack on the table. "Found the last of the potatoes in the root cellar. They're sprouting, but they'll cook fine." She took out the paring knife and set to peeling. The rhythm steadied her hands. "You ever think about having someone else here?" she asked. "A neighbor, maybe, or a hired hand. Don't trust many to stay the winter." She looked up. "You think I will?" He met her eyes. "Yes." She didn't blink. "I think so, too." A few days later, Ben Larkin arrived, soaked through and riding a tired mule. He stayed the night, trading stories over supper and leaving behind fresh salt, a bundle of wax-sealed envelopes, and a tin of peppermint drops. Before he left, he tipped his hat to Pierce and said, "Glad to see you on your feet, miss." Malcolm usually keeps to himself. She watched him ride off through the wet trail, then turned to Malcolm. "You tell him about me?" He shrugged. Ben sees what's in front of him. That evening, she stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the sky clear over the hills. Malcolm came up behind her, his steps quiet in the soft earth. "Winter's only a few weeks off," he said. "I know. Gets hard out here. Snow cuts off the pass. Food runs thin if you don't plan right." She turned to face him. "I'm not going anywhere." He studied her, his voice low. "I believe you." She reached out, her fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away. "I want to build something here," she said. "Not just get by. Something that holds." His breath caught just slightly. "We can do that. Together." When he leaned down, it wasn't sudden. It was quiet, like everything else between them. His lips touched hers, warm and certain, and she didn't flinch away. The wind moved through the grass behind them. The last of the rain had gone, and the stars were beginning to come out, one by one. The first frost came quiet, crusting the water trough and silvering the grass around the cabin. Malcolm lifted the latch on the barn door with fingers stiff from cold, breath rising in clouds as he checked the feed bins. Pierce stood just inside the doorway, arms folded beneath her shawl, watching the way his shoulders moved beneath the wool of his coat. She had begun rising before light, pressing biscuits from lard and flour, boiling water for his coffee the way he liked it strong, but not bitter. She hadn't said she liked the work, but he could tell by the care she took in it. She didn't do anything halfway. They sat together on the porch that evening, wrapped in their coats, a quilt stretched across both their laps. Malcolm smoked a pipe, the scent of it curling into the cold air. She held a jar of preserved peaches between her palms, letting the heat from the fire inside warm her fingers. He tapped the ash from his pipe. "You ever think about what you'd do if we had more land?" She turned her head. "You mean if we bought it or if someone gave it?"
"Either."
She thought for a moment. "I'd want fruit trees. Good ones. Maybe some bees to keep them honest." He grinned around the stem of the pipe. "You'd keep bees?" "If I had the time and the netting," she said. They don't sting unless you're careless. Malcolm leaned back against the post. There's an acre north of the ridge. Belongs to no one far as I know. Dry now, but it's got old roots. Might take to planting again. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I'd help you clear it. Come spring. He looked sideways at her. You're not just saying that?
No, she said.
I mean to stay. And I mean to build something worth staying for. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, and the scent of juniper smoke drifted out through the doorframe. Pierce reached over and rested her hand on Malcolm's knee, her fingers light but certain. You ever think you'd want children? She asked. His voice was quiet. I used to. You still could. He studied her face. That's something you think about? She nodded, slow and honest. Sometimes. But not just to have them. Only if the world's steady enough for them to grow. He took her hand in his, rough palm curling gently around hers. We'd make it steady, he said. The next morning they rode out. Not far just beyond the ridge, where the ground dipped and the cottonwoods thinned. Pierce rode her own mount now, a brown mare Malcolm had traded a saddle blanket and a scythe blade for. The mare was sure-footed, and Pierce handled her like she'd been born to it. Malcolm pointed to a patch where the earth sank slightly, still damp from the last snowmelt. That's where the creek used to run. Might again if we dig it out. She dismounted and knelt, pressing her fingers into the soil. It's dark, she said. Still holds water underneath. He crouched beside her. You thinking what I am? We could line it with stone. Keep the run narrow. Use it for irrigation. He nodded. We'd need help. Maybe Larkin knows a man. She looked around the clearing, her breath curling in the cold air. If we make this field good again, we'll have something to pass down. To who? She met his eyes. If we're lucky, someone who calls you Pa. They made love for the first time that night, slow and without ceremony, as though it had always been meant to happen. No declarations. Just the quiet certainty of two people choosing each other without question. Afterward, she lay against him, her head tucked below his jaw, listening to the wind stir the branches outside. He stroked her back in long, steady lines, his hand warm even against her bare skin. You ever think we'd end up like this? She whispered. No, he said. But I hoped. She kissed his collarbone, then settled in closer, her arm draped across his chest. I'm not going anywhere, Malcolm. I know, he said. The lamp burned low, and the fire crackled beside them. Outside, frost crept across the windows, but inside the cabin, everything held. The thaw came slow and soft, the kind that faded the snow in patches and left the earth damp and rich. Pierce stood at the edge of the clearing with a spade in her hand, Malcolm beside her, sleeves rolled, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. The ground gave beneath her boots, but not too deep to work. They'd spent the last 3 weeks hauling stone from the creek, piling it in neat rows by the cabin. He'd cleared the old growth with an axe first, then the two of them had set to digging, marking where the channel would run. A small trench now cut through the ridge field, winding like a carved ribbon. The first time it held runoff, Malcolm crouched beside it and dipped a hand in, grinning without a word. That morning, she'd risen before the sun and lit a candle in the front room. She had an idea she hadn't spoken yet. As they worked, she finally said, I want to build a root cellar. Malcolm adjusted the rope on his shoulder. Where were you thinking? She pointed behind the cabin, where the slope dropped into a patch of shaded earth. North side stays cooler. We'd lose less to spoilage. He gave a nod. You draw it out, I'll dig. They worked until midday, then sat on the porch with plates of cold cornbread and pinto beans between them. A hawk circled high above the ridge. Pierce shielded her eyes and watched it glide. I never told you what sent me west, she said. Malcolm didn't answer, just waited. I was married once, she said. Not for long. He died in a rail accident outside Topeka. I was 19. His hand stilled on the plate. We had a small place, she went on. I tried to keep it, but the bank didn't care I was widowed. I held on as long as I could. Then I got sick and lost what was left. I'm sorry, Malcolm said. I'm not, she replied. I wouldn't wish him gone, but if he hadn't died, I wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't have found you. There was no pause in him then. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. That evening, she brought down a bundle from the loft, an old quilt she hadn't touched since she arrived. She spread it across the bed they now shared. The squares were faded, but still held the stitching her mother had put in by hand. I'd like to mend it, she said. So nothing in this house carries holes. He helped her stretch it across the floor. We'll keep it for the next cold season. She looked up at him. Or, for the next person to sleep under this roof. Malcolm's eyes softened. You reckon we'll have a little one by then? I do. Spring deepened. The pasture greened. The trench filled easier now, fed by a spring Malcolm had carved open with a pick just beyond the trees. They planted rows of beans, squash, and barley. She kept the ledgers, marking each sprout's height with a piece of chalk on the barn wall. He mended the fence line with pine rails and taught her how to set a post level. One afternoon, while she was gathering eggs, she paused in the doorway of the coop and pressed a hand to her belly. She waited a long moment, then smiled. That night, she sat across from him at the table and said, I'm carrying. He didn't speak at first. He just reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His grip was steady, but his thumb trembled where it rested against her knuckles. You sure? I know it, she said. He stood then, pulled her to her feet, and held her, his nose pressed to her hairline, one hand resting gently over her stomach. She didn't cry. Neither did he. They just stood there, wrapped in something too deep for words. The summer came hot, but the fields held. The stone-lined trench kept the plants fed, and the bees found the blossoms without needing coaxing. She started sewing a small blanket in the evenings, her hands moving slow and careful. He built a cradle from spare wood, sanding it smooth beneath the porch awning while she read aloud from an old almanac. They didn't speak much about what was coming. They didn't need to. It was there between every laugh, every quiet glance, every time he reached for her hand without thinking. When the leaves began to turn, she went into labor just after dawn. Malcolm sent for the midwife who lived near the southern trail, and by dusk, their daughter arrived, strong-lunged and red-cheeked, with her mother's dark hair and her father's quiet eyes. They named her Clara. Malcolm built a rocking bench the next week and placed it under the cottonwood tree that now shaded the yard. He sat there each evening with Clara in his arms, humming low as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Pierce healed slow but steady. She pressed herbs from the garden for tea and stitched more blankets in the quiet afternoons. When Clara cried, Malcolm was always the first to lift her. One night, as they watched the stars blink into the sky, Pierce leaned her head on Malcolm's shoulder. You ever think about what comes next? I think about tomorrow, he said. And the day after. She ran her hand lightly over Clara's back. I think we'll be all right. He kissed the crown of her head and said, We already are. Years passed, and the field grew into itself. The trees stayed full, and the root cellar kept the food through every winter. They added a second cradle 5 seasons later, and a boy named Eli took his first steps under the same cottonwood where his sister had learned to walk. Pierce never got sick again. Malcolm never left her side. And long after the children were grown and the porch wood had worn smooth, you could still find them there in the evenings, her hand in his, their chairs tilted just so, watching the land they'd built together hold strong beneath the sky.